when an athlete becomes an Olympic champion, for them to go to become an Olympic champion again, that's a big pursuit, to be a multiple Olympic champion. But it's harder to get new ideas across the line for the person going for the second, third, fourth, or fifth. Because what they've done is they've crystallized the process that's got them to that first gold medal or the second gold medal. And then they then become sort of attached to that. That's what got me to the Olympic podium, and you'd understand that. But it's probably not the thing that's going to get them there again. And when the field emerges, or when they get older, or they have to recover from injury, they're going to have to stay open-minded, when actually one of the tendencies is to become closed-minded about the approach. And so one of the things that we now try and train, if somebody's going to get stubborn and repetitive, they get good at debriefing over and over. So they get good at learning. And we train that early in athletes now.
Dr. Ingham, it's a pleasure having you on The Augmented Life.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, Michael.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I really want to dig into optimizing human performance with you, and I'd like to start with something that you really changed my mind about, which it just was not on my radar at all. The importance of optimizing recovery time. I'm so, I guess, accomplishment obsessed. It didn't really occur to me that paying attention to and managing my own rest and recovery was actually an important ingredient for the opposite. Now you've advised and coached literally world-class athletes as well as world-class executives. How did your understanding of, let's call it, strategic rest evolve?
Well, I mean, it comes down to fundamental education, and the oh wow, I didn't realize that type of moment that I often have with perhaps people who just haven't studied it. For example, that we respond to training, physical training as an example, but through the stress recovery adaptation curve. And so the simple bit that everyone gets there is that you're not fitter after you finish a marathon. You're very tired. But everyone gets that. But most people expect that they're getting fitter during the exercise. And so they then do the maths and think it through logically. Everyone's had muscle soreness, for example, and everyone feels tired after a training session. And that's the point at which your performance, your physiological systems, and some psychological sort of innovation, as in innovating nerves, not innovation, those are suppressed. And then the body goes, what the hell do you do that for? And so then a cascade of metabolic changes, transcription, growth, all those things get put in place, but over time. And so you're recovering during that period. And then the body will then put in place new systems, harder, tougher systems that will minimize the disruption if you were to give it the same stimulus. And so that's the concept of getting fitter. And so a classic example, perhaps probably the most obvious one that I'm known for, or gave prominence, certainly when I wrote about it, was supporting a heptathlete. So a multi-eventer, 7 events, Olympic athlete. And that is a chance for them to, if they're successful, to be called the best all-round female athlete in the world. And working with that group of athletes, where you've got lots of different competing demands about should we focus more on the high jump or the shot put or the 200 meters or the 800 meters, when actually one of the things that we could do to upgrade all of them is optimize the space in between those events. And so high intensity hurdles, 100-meter hurdles, that's the first event, goes straight into the high jump. You've got probably a 30-minute window there where you could optimize recovery. And so for a heptathlete, they could run the 800 meters quicker for a one-off than they would do at the end of a heptathlon. That makes sense. They're tireder at the end of it. But if we could increase that by just changing the way in which we recover throughout the 2-day event, then you can actually get more out of the 800 meters. So you get as a point score there. So it comes down to the physical nature of it, but there is a psychological version of this too, where and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi coined this, that you have this idea of immersion in a task, focusing, head down, intense concentration, high cognitive demand. And then if you were to take your time out of that task, he calls it incubation, followed by inspiration. So immersion, incubation, inspiration, the 3 I's, where it's a similar type of response. You're stressing, you're recovering, and then you're improving.
Wow. Okay. So many follow-ups here. But let me begin this way. What did you find particularly counterintuitive rest and recovery tactics that maybe I could employ as well?
The interesting thing for a lot of athletes is doing nothing. There's and I wonder if this is going to be packaged and the latest gizmo, the latest idea. I'm going to go and do 20 minutes of nothing. Selling that is going to be difficult, but in that instance, a lot of athletes who are wired and focused and determined, they actually struggle to switch off, to do nothing, and just lie on the sofa and watch Netflix, for example. That might be, for some people, the easiest prescription. But certainly the easiest division is time on task, time off task, and thinking about I want quality in the work that I do, and putting a block of time attached to that focus, and then making sure that that's followed up with time off task. As an executive, I would literally be telling or asking people to consider a walking meeting rather than an indoor meeting, desk-based task. Then it could be that there's a contrast aspect to that. So there's outdoor, there's natural light, there's connecting with nature, there's movement, there's a different brain state there. Those are some of the obvious things. In the one thing I think that sports physiology has got a lot to answer for at the moment is things like iced baths, where you're exposing yourself to a lot of cold for a period of time, and there's a lot of coverage around this that's causing people to buy these baths and do these in the morning and follow this protocol and whatever. When actually for physical improvement, they could be dampening the response. And so what's become famous or the latest idea can actually be mitigating your efforts and ameliorating your efforts. So you're not actually getting the gain that you're after from the stimulus that you're trying to put in there.
Right. How do you break that down with the athletes that you work with, so that you're willing to experiment, but you're somehow validating that the new experiment is actually working?
So actually, the origin of the ice bath it's a good example. It's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, so I careful I don't go on too much about this.
All right.
The early 2000s, some fundamental research showing that the reduction in muscle soreness was less impaired in the days after repeated sprint training. And a number of high-profile athletes got hold of this, and they were using ice baths after intense training. And so it became famous. Well, aren't they tough? Aren't they doing what's incredibly necessary to be an elite athlete? And one of the athletes I was working with, world medalist 1500 meter runner, said to me, "Hey, look, I've been doing this for a year now, and Tuesday intense interval training sessions. She said, after that session on a Wednesday, after a ice bath, I feel better. I feel fresher. I feel more ready to go. My muscles don't feel as sore as they normally do. And I'm able to do more mileage. I'm going from 70 miles to 77 miles per week, but I'm no faster. And I was like, ooh, that's interesting. So you're putting more in, but you're not getting any more out. And that does not make sense for an elite athlete. In fact, you'd want to the other way around. You'd want to do less and get the same or more. And so it was actually an athlete that provoked my thinking in this area of thinking, are we putting some scientific research and some ideas in front of them that we don't know what the long-term effects are? And sure enough, it's played out. Your biology is smarter than that research study in the Journal of Sports Sciences back in 2001, that you have to start then testing and learning. And ultimately, for some athletes, those sorts of treatments, recovery methods, advanced recovery methods could be useful. So the difference here is where an Olympic athlete has got 4 years to prepare. Maybe every year they have got to step up and perform, world championships and so on. But for a premiership footballer or for an NBA basketball player, they're going to have to perform multiple times per week. And so they might not necessarily be looking to advance their physiology. They might just be looking to kind of just get back to normal quickly. And so if you've got a tight turnaround between games, those sorts of things could be really useful.
How does willpower interact with this? Like, it seems to me like there's an anti-pattern here, as we talk about in software engineering, where extraordinary willpower can lead to extraordinary results, but it can also lead to a year's worth of increasing your inputs without seeing a measurable gain. Do you see that with the performers that you're coaching, that sometimes you actually need to dial them back?
Well, yes. So elite athletes tend to be, and this is a broad brush statement, but it's been backed up by studies comparing super elites versus elites. So super elites defined by going to a world or Olympic championships and winning time and time again. So it's a very, very select group, and they tend to be very outcome focused and very goal oriented. And so, they want to get to the top of the mountain. That's their absolute focus. And so part of that is that those species, that rare group of outliers, they're very good at seeing the top of the mountain, but they're also then very good at looking at what the next steps need to be. So they in terms of goal setting, these are called distal goals, which is the top of the mountain goal. What's at the top of the mountain? I want to get there. That's a distal goal. But a proximal goal, so close in terms of distance, what do I have to do today to take me forward towards that goal? And so sometimes we've got to help them manage their focus. So it could be that they're thinking about the gold medal too much and not thinking about, you've got to keep this tangible today. Or sometimes the intense pressure and that pursuit of mastery and craft gets them very intense about that split that they've got to perform, or that power output they've got to achieve for that amount of time. And so it can become quite stressful trying to do everything you can today to get to that. And so sometimes this is like a counterintuitive thing, that sometimes the best thing that I've told an athlete to do is chill the hell out. Or I might term it in a different way. Right, my prescription for you today is go to the cinema and go and have a pizza, go and chill with some friends, and then they'll go, no, I need to concentrate, I need to focus, and I'll say, okay, but I'm concerned about your stress hormone response. I want you to invest in a period of time where your hormonal system will rebalance a little bit more. And then they go, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. I'm investing in sort of low cortisol state. I can't remember what your question was now, but that idea of pursuing excellence can sometimes be dialed up and dialed down in the wrong way. And having kind of an outside coach that sees that and can offset it with perhaps helping them with what they don't see is important.
Did I tell you about breaking my own arm when my willpower exceeded my physical capabilities?
Oh, it's like a movie where you've had to cut your arm off to escape from a mountain fall.
Thankfully, not that dramatic. I'm a skinny computer nerd, and I broke my right arm wrestling because I was arm wrestling someone vastly stronger than me. But of course, when you're arm wrestling someone stronger than you, you merely lose. Right? Like the reason that this resulted in a terrible break of my right humerus is that I was myself exerting a counterforce equal to breaking my own bone rather than give up. And I think this may have helped me raise venture financing, but it was it was a difficult physical recovery. I just hate giving up, and I think I had not programmed the right. I was missing feedback loops informing my intuition or my willpower about where the safety line should be, I suppose.
Wow. Well, that's impressive. As a physiologist, I would be concerned about your bone health, but I would...
Yeah, right. But we had to rule that out first. Exactly. Like first it was like, oh, is there something wrong with the bones? It's like, oh no, the boy just meditates too hard and pushed himself.
Okay. Well, fair play. Good work.
Oh, speaking of meditating too hard, as you were talking about speed recovery, in the case of being, for instance, a heptathlete, my mind immediately went to pranayama. Like I was wondering if breathing techniques, if you've got like 8 minutes, is it time to break out the yogic breathing techniques? Do you ever experiment with that kind of thing?
A little bit. I think it's probably overplayed, and it's oversimplified in terms of its effect. I think huge benefit in terms of mindfulness, pressure management. We would encourage athletes who are struggling to perhaps getting to the right zone of motivation. So if you overstimulate yourself, over-arouse before an event, you can be too dialed in, everything gets tense, and you don't perform at your maximum. And so actually, breathing technique is one of the very few things that we can control our sympathetic nervous system, and so grabbing hold of that and calming our response is useful. And I would say that for an executive, for example, or anybody who's in a stress-based response, when actually the stress, the feeling of stress, the adrenaline, the hypothalamus, the shutdown of cognitive process from the thinking brain to the basic reptilian brain at the amygdala, that shift, grasping that back might be in your interest if cognitive quality and thinking is a priority. So if you're in a meeting and you're triggered and you're wound up by somebody, when actually you need to get that back, some breath-based movements could be really useful. It's also something that's not obvious to the outside world. You can perform it. You don't have to sort of jump into an ice bath or holding some sort of pose to do it. So I'm not dismissing it. But if I was to offer a contrast with aerobic fitness, which is far more prophylactic, far more protective, far more powerful in your holistic self, if you had 8 minutes worth of time to dedicate to deep breathing, you're probably going to get more return from doing 8 minutes of aerobic-based fitness. So if you look at the stress-based response of fit people, or people who have done aerobic training in the morning, okay, maybe a bit more than 8 minutes, their stress-based response throughout the day to stressors, their cortisol response, heart rate response, galvanic skin-based response, all of those are dampened. And so they're in much more of a resilient, controlled state throughout the day. And so if people are talking, yeah, I'm investing in myself, I'm doing this deep breathing, that's fantastic. But if they're neglecting their aerobic fitness, that's a massive area that they're losing performance from.
Right. I'm just now in my 40s starting, I think, to apply these lessons, because as I see myself as an intellectual. So my default move is to solve all problems with my brain. I want to think my way through everything, and I can't tell you how much I've improved my mood, my cognitive functioning, by tuning into my body and actually taking care of it. And for that matter, I even see that with friends and their mental health. Again, like, I'd love to talk you out of being depressed. It turns out taking you for a walk is probably a better move.
Yeah. We have a lovely phrase in sort of physical activity psychology, which is, always take your dog for a walk, even if you don't have one. And that idea of getting out into nature, moving, there's some interesting research of just about getting out of your chair. If a lot of people are working for prolonged periods of time and they are prioritizing cognitive quality, cognitive performance, cognitive health, if you contrast 4 hours of deep work sitting, trying to concentrate versus and then an 8-minute break, versus a study that looked at every 30 minutes you get 2 minutes, get up, move about. And the 2-minute version, so the frequent movement of getting up and moving and walking, maintains cognitive blood flow. And so that in itself, 30 minutes on, 2 minutes off, you could, or 28 minutes, whatever it might be, to neaten it up. Again, you would program and structure your day in such a way that you're not just sat down all the time.
Asking you to generalize a bit from here, I know you coached extremely elite athletes and then also just elite performers in a wide variety of other endeavors, including executives. What are other crossover opportunities, like things you learned from peak athletic performance that can actually be brought into the boardroom, as we say?
I think the obvious area, and I think this is a continuum. This is how I would put it. That on one end of the spectrum you have astronauts who prepare, and then they go into space and they come down and then go on podcasts and go to schools, and they recover and that's it, and probably don't go back again. Olympic athletes every 4 years, and then you've probably got other athletes maybe every 1 year, and then, as I mentioned, those games-based sports that have heavy competitive schedules, a couple of times a week, then tennis players and so on. And then you've probably got other performers in this space, few physical sports-based performers that I'm quite interested in. I'm doing some work on this. So musical theatre, they have to perform 8 times per week, perhaps a day off, but they have to be at their best. They cannot underperform. Otherwise, they will just get moved out. They'll just get moved on. Ballerinas who have to practice for 3 different ballets during the day and then go on stage and perform in the evening at the highest level of quality. There's always being judged. And then you have probably got business people who have got maybe whose effectiveness is time on task. So the more they do, the better. And I would say, I don't know whether this is I'm overinterpreting this, but it probably is for high-level executives or middle managers there. But some executives have got the ability to move back down that continuum, where actually their effectiveness isn't just time on task and doing more and grinding out stuff. It's actually sparks of brilliance, where the quality of their decision making, the their interpretation of diverse pieces of information is actually the rare thing that they can do and bring. It's like a world beater in that area. Those people, I don't think I see. I engage with a lot of different types of executives. But for those people to ask a very simple question, when do I need to be at my best? And then reverse engineering the conditions around that so that they are at their best. In the same way that we would plan and plot a taper into a competition, we would plan and plot the nutrition, the rest, the recovery, the warm-up strategies, and we would prepare that and then test it at length. So a lot of people go into these high-stakes situations, whether it's bidding for the contract to rewire a city, for example. That's, you're in front of presidents and world leaders, but testing your performance under pressure. It's not really ethical to put an athlete into a stadium, 100,000 people, and not have prepared them to handle the pressure. So we call that pressure training. I don't see that much in business and corporate worlds. I feel I just go from one thing to the next, and briefing, and then the next thing, and then we're done. And then we just are shattered at vacation time. Rather than thinking, what are the big points in my year where I absolutely have to perform, and then getting things in place to support that.
That matches my own experience hiring executives for high stakes, world changing companies. I've noticed some levels where, you got your basic table stakes of self-control of time. Then quite a bit of great executive skill building is just around systematizing your own work, which has the effect of increasing your time on task. But none of that gets you to the highest level of performance where, in my experience, you see the best performers are doing more novel or diverse things than their generally excellent peers. You have people who really systematize the job and they're super committed to it, and you can really grind out a great performance. But it's performance earned through consistency. And the fact is that the business world is extraordinarily dynamic. So those that have the systematization skills, but then can do poetry on top, that are actually increasing the diversity of the things they try, that they're not even necessarily increasing the percentage of things that succeed. They're increasing their rate of trying new things. Though that's, in my experience, what 10x executive leadership looks like. Just really kind of counterintuitive. You almost have to pass through these phases of consistency to then break out into something that's a little more dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to, I think, perhaps a simple structure such as immersion, incubation, and inspiration that I mentioned. And the missing part there, I think, is having the permission but also being competitive enough to put the breathing space after the task so that there's a degree of processing that goes on. Certainly a lot of the executives that I've coached over time, admittedly there is, I can't just say to a CEO that's in front of, a dictator, I literally have coached them, that I can't say, can you send a deputy? They have to be there. So there is a demand for them that means their schedule is extremely busy, but prioritizing some processing time. And I think that's one of the big areas I've really noticed in business is that people are underperforming because they don't have that breathing space. They go from one task to the next, to the next, to the next, and they're no better as a consequence of each experience, as well as the absence of debriefing. In performance environments, it is so ubiquitous. In sport, in military exploration, you debrief, because if you don't, you're going to lose next week, almost certainly. That you won't be better. You won't have taken the lessons from it. And there's a truism in sport. Most athletes lose most of the time, so they have to take the lessons out of it. Otherwise, it's just a very it's a heartbreaking experience. But why wouldn't you do that? And so that probably at least can provide as you said, sort of systemize an opportunity to reflect and to debrief. And can I go off on a bit of a tangent here, Michael? Because I think this is useful. One of the things I've noticed, I've been working in this area for 30 years now. One of the interesting observations I've worked with is that when an athlete becomes an Olympic champion, for them to go to become an Olympic champion again, that's a big pursuit, to be a multiple Olympic champion. But it's harder to get new ideas across the line for the person going for the second, third, fourth, or fifth. Because what they've done is they've crystallized the process that's got them to that first gold medal or the second gold medal. And then they then become sort of attached to that. That's what got me to the Olympic podium, and you'd understand that. But it's probably not the thing that's going to get them there again. And when the field emerges, or when they get older, or they have to recover from injury, they're going to have to stay open-minded, when actually one of the tendencies is to become closed-minded about the approach. And so what's got us here is not going to get us there. And so one of the things that we now try and train, if somebody's going to get stubborn and repetitive, they get good at debriefing over and over. So they get good at learning. And we train that early in athletes now.
Right. Ooh. Oh, all right. So that leads me to something that I'm really curious about. We've talked now quite a bit about coaching elite athletes and some lessons that can be drawn from that training and applied to leadership. But I know that you've also worked with extraordinary individuals that have gone in the other direction, right? They've achieved great business success and now want to become adventure athletes, which is a wild transition, something that holds a certain appeal to me as well. What are the success factors that you've seen there? Like who grows into their dream or their ambition, and who tends to fail, and why?
Well, I have to say that I've been really humbled by the types of characters who've been drawn to at least be coached by me. That you do have, maybe you get used to working with the most conscientious, diligent people who are Olympic athletes. You don't have to sort of motivate them to get going in the morning. They're on it most of the time. That's not always the case with professional level athletes who maybe skill-based sport. They've got to a certain level and they don't have to work hard. But most CEOs, executives, they know that if they start investing in something, that they're going to get development. And I guess that will come from probably their MBA or their economics degree, that I put some effort here and it's going to give me some return. What's been really fascinating is people who have started on that journey whilst an executive of, I want to do some premium level sporting challenges, an Ironman or a triathlon or a marathon. But it's then meant that they've gone, I'm just going to quit and I'm going to do this all the time. That's been a fascinating journey to me, that perhaps there's something missing in life, that they're not getting personal fulfillment. They haven't invested in themselves. They haven't pushed the boundaries of what they're able to do in their work. They might have been very successful, but it might not have been as fulfilling. But what I've been pleasantly surprised with, the same diligence, the same approach, the same intensity and the same skills that I would need to coach an Olympian, I've had to apply to CEOs who are very goal focused, and we have to sort of bring them down from that edge. We just might be dealing with different physiology. That there's an engine that's probably 3/4 of the size of an athlete, or the physical resilience might be something that's just a little bit lower. But what has been wonderful in that regard is people exceeding their expectations and realizing that there is more in themselves. And I think a lot of people could take from that. If you look at the trends of the time taken to complete a marathon, I think there's a study there. Around 10 million people they've captured the data, and it follows a normal distribution curve, as you might expect. Yeah, very few people running 2 hours, very few people running 7 hours. Maybe they're in fancy dress, or they've walked it slowly. So it follows a normal distribution curve, except for spikes at 3 hours, 3.5 hours, 4.5 hours, 4 hours, 4.5 hours, 5 hours. And so there's where people have spotted they've got an opportunity to go under that marker. At the 4 hours, 3 hours, the 3.5 hours, I've got an opportunity to do it. And they found more in themselves than you would normally expect. And I think that's something perhaps we could all learn, that there's probably a little bit more in the tank. We're all more a bit capable than we imagine.
Right. Ooh, I love that. And that's such an internal process. You're touching on something else, a kind of character trait, but also a skill, which is coachability. Like certainly my experience, maybe going in the opposite direction, I've had to put quite a bit of work into becoming a good delegator, and I think there's still more for me to learn there. Similarly, I imagine that coachability is a skill one can learn just like any other. What are the success factors, right? Like you can only take on so many clients, right? So what are the coachability factors you look for in order to, accept someone? And can you point at ways in which, we can improve our own coachability starting today?
Yeah, although I'm an applied performance scientist, I'm not I have some research academic publications, but I haven't worked in academia. And so my job has always had a coaching element. And so I would immediately throw that on myself. How well can I coach the person in front of me? And so the bandwidth there is probably something that I have, and these are gross simplifications. But somebody who's been to Oxford or Cambridge, they're doing a PhD in microbiology, they're going to have different questions from somebody from a traveling community who doesn't know how to read and write and has never studied. And so there's no prejudice from my side. It's how can I inspire both levels, and the communication, the ability to read the response, to see whether I've got somebody engaged. That requires different intelligences from me, not just understanding the technical aspects of my domain or the logical mathematical data interpretation, but interpersonal communication, the ability to reflect whether this is the right time, or the ability to demonstrate something. So I always hold it on myself first and foremost, in terms of, I remember working with a Premiership footballer and just thought, God, this person just doesn't care at all, and they asked me to help them. And I'm thinking, what have I done? Or why are they not more engaged in the process? And rather than thinking about their issues or problems, I've got to think about how can I shift my approach to get them engaged, get them inspired, to train their mindset so that they might be more open-minded, interested, And that might be just taking the time to speak to them, to get to know them, to understand their world before I presuppose that a certain type of approach might work. But really, at this stage in my career, I tend to like to look for complex problem-solving performance challenges where there's a unique set of circumstances that only a few people might be able to unpack. But for that person, I'd want a level of open-mindedness. It's probably something we're having to get better at as applied performance scientists is coping with the waves of pseudoscience and BS out there. And so open-mindedness can be great, but they've also got to be discerning in equal measures of because typically elite athletes will come to us with ideas, but they might also be stubborn and don't want to change. And so you've got to think about both approaches. There's also just a hunger and a humility, in terms of what you really look for in the best. I really want to improve what I'm capable of doing, and I'm willing to kind of be quite grounded in the approach that I take. A pursuit of a difficult performance challenge, or even squeezing in bouts of exercise, being more rigorous about your sleep, changes in nutrition, they're hard. High performance is not for everybody. And so having a humility to change and adapt and learn about themselves, I think, is something I really look for.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As an applied scientist, can you tell us a story about a particularly interesting but perhaps challenging process you took to translate something you first learned about in an academic paper, right? So, there's promising research, but it's not clear how to turn that into something that's, practical and actionable for, the deliberate achievement of higher performance.
So the example that springs to mind is changing the warm-up before middle distance events. And so the way I coach this particular concept, I do now, but I wasn't effective back then, but is that if you're doing a set of intervals, say, for example, you're doing 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, and at a hard intensity, typically people will find the second repetition easier than the first. The first repetition tends to be, oh God, this is going to be hard. This is going to be a hard day. And people sort of settle into the rep and they're puffing away, and then they get to the end of it and they have the recovery period. And then the second rep comes in, and what happens is they tend to think, actually, this is all right. I'm going to get on with this. And what happens is as you increase your exercise, your work, your physical muscular exercise, your oxygen system switches on, but it does so with a lag. And so your aerobic system, your oxygen delivery system, doesn't meet all of your work demands. And so I have to fit in the rest of it with the anaerobic stuff, the stuff that stings. But it switches on quicker that second time round. Okay? So what we know is if you do a priming warm-up, one that switches your system on adequately, you can get that switch-on system as fast as possible during a race. So if you think about having that first rep struggle in the warm-up, your race performance can actually be better, and that leads to less fatigue towards the end of a race. And it's all about oxygen uptake kinetics, how quickly you switch on, and that you can speed that response with a priming-based warm-up. So we knew this really well in the early 2000s. And we talked to athletes and we started saying, we think this has got an opportunity to improve your performance. Could we get it across the line? No. And when I researched this and showed a 1 second improvement in 800 meters, which is about 10 meters, so there's a real gain in elite athletes, the Australian system said to me, "Why are you publishing this data? Why aren't you keeping all this intellectual property back?" And I said, "You go and try and have that conversation with the coach." And the reason it was difficult, I think, was that they did not want to fiddle around. They did not want to mess around with what they were doing. And so this, to me, is what I call a high risk but high reward return, or high return domain or topic. They don't want to change this. And so rather than just sort of suggesting that they change the warm-up before the Olympic final, you actually hatch that plan long before. And so you're trying it in training. You're sitting down, talking them through. You're showing them the system, perhaps measuring it in the lab. And then you're trying it in a low-key competition. And if you're seeing that they're getting the benefit, then they're more confident to be able to take that concept and then put it in place for a big competition. That's in contrast with an innovation that we used before the London Olympics, which was warming trousers. So this is to maximize power output. So you do your warm up, but then what tends to happen is a period of time you're held by the competition, and you then settle down and your muscles get colder. And so having warming trousers on reduces more power. And so one's a passive intervention and the other one's quite active. And you've just got to demonstrate it in different ways. The uptake is very different. One's easier to get across the line than the other.
Right. Wow. That was eye-opening. I love it. I need my own pair of warming trousers.
Yeah. Warming trousers, warming garments. If you watch a big track meet, or if you watch a lot of sporting competition and it's over and done with in 20, 30 seconds, or you're looking at the subs bench and they're just brought on, if they're just sat there in their kit and it's a cold night, you've got to question where's the care, but also where's the competition about keeping that athlete ready to go. So it's still not really accepted, but it's got great potential.
Is there have you run into an interesting example of working out a strategy or tactic coming from the other direction? So an athlete has an idea, right? They come to you. This is a performance improvement that I heard about. I want to try. And how do you take that? How do you turn it into an action plan? How do you validate it? Has there been anything particularly successful that you then tried to copy?
It's less common, but and there are lots of ideas that you might sort of try and give some airtime to, some discussion to, some testing to. One that springs to mind that I thought was particularly interesting was a javelin thrower that I was working with. And from a strength and power point of view, she was being encouraged to undertake particularly heavy but power-based training in the gym. So power cleans at a high force velocity contraction rate. And that makes sense. It's sensible that she was being advised that way. And she said, I've tried it out, but I just don't feel as good as when I go back to my old ways when I used to just do circuit training. Now, circuit training is a bit of a mishmash of a bit of aerobic, bit of anaerobic, bit of strength, bit of flexibility. So it's a bit of everything. And so we said, okay, well, that's an interesting hypothesis. Why don't we test the difference and see how it works? And so leading into a competition period, we tested her hormonal responses, growth hormone and testosterone-based responses to heavy lifting, power-based training, some sprint intervals, and some circuit training. And what was really interesting in that case was that for a bunch of other athletes, the power-based training, heavy lifting, but at speed, came out as the best hormonal response, but not for her. So that was an interesting idea that simply, okay, well, you feel different. You've told us you feel different. And now we're supporting that with some objective evidence that the physiological milieu that's going on in your system is slightly different. You're responding differently to other people. So, yeah, do it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Validating her intuition and introspection. Ooh, oh, I love it. Wow. I love the quantitative testing that you underwent, at the hormonal level in order to look in, kind of look behind the curtain to see what was really happening. Excellent insight. Dr. Ingham, it's been fantastic having you here. How do listeners find out more about your work? How do they find you online?
Well, please do. Yeah, look me up. I'm at drsteveingham.com and at supportingchampions.co.uk. I'm on several platforms, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and so on. And I have my own podcast called Supporting Champions. So hopefully people can jump across and have a little listen to that too.
Fabulous. Thank you.